Welcome back to This Was Supposed to Be Easy, your go-to podcast for connection, joy, and a good dose of laughter.
Hosted by two friends who've seen enough of life to know that it's never as simple as it sounds
or looks.
Each conversation celebrates the diverse journeys we travel, the moments of bravery, the strength we didn't know we had, and the joy we find along the way.
Because let's be honest, life is full of things that were supposed to be easy, but turned out to be harder.
And definitely funnier
than we thought. This is Amy.
And this is Cheryl. And if it were easy, we wouldn't be here. Amy, one of the things we often talk about when we are on our car rides are the books that we're reading or listening to. I call them both reading. Over the last several years, I think that we've found sometimes that we've read the same book, but very often you've read a book that makes me very curious. And so I read it, and then we can even have more conversations about it. And several times I've said, hey, we should talk about books every once in a while on the podcast, but we haven't quite gone that far with our book conversations. And I kind of am hoping that we might be able to do that today, because you were just telling me about a book that you read called The 7-Year Slip. I want to have a conversation about it. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Certainly. So it is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poster. I might be pronouncing her last name wrong. I will say that. But it was a really good book. There were some interesting ideas. And so if you have ever watched the movie The Lake House,
Yes.
There's some similarities to that in that it's kind of about this magical apartment. And there is this woman who is living in this apartment. And one day she walks through the door and it is 7 years in the past. And so 7 years in the past is this gentleman that is staying at this apartment while she, in the real 7 years in the past, she was away on a vacation. And so current day main character, whose name Clementine. So current day Clementine meets the 7 years in the past version of this main character, Ewan. And so the idea then became about timing. And how do we as people, how would we look at our person of who we were 7 years ago compared to the person that we are today and the life that we've lived kind of in between that? And so it just had me thinking a lot about time as kind of a construct in general. And also then starting to think about who I was 7 years ago. And what kind of threw my head in a loop was that was really kind of the last year before COVID. And yes. I know you and I have talked about how ever since COVID and lockdown and all of that type of stuff, timing has felt a little quirky. And so those are kind of some of the things that I think we can talk a bit about today.
Sure. I'm having these flashbacks to the Lake House movie, and I might need to, I am not a fan of rewatching older movies, but I mean, a good Sandra Bullock movie, you've just got to love. So I might have to go back and rewatch that as I think about this. The other thing I'll say before I talk about my gut reaction is that I love that we have these conversations about fiction, and we also have these conversations about nonfiction. You know, often it's a personal development book or a psychology book of some kind that we're reading, or any human interaction sort of book. And so I love that this one is actually a fiction book, but it immediately made us think about real life scenarios. And like you mentioned, when you said 7 years, my brain instantly went to, this is 2026. What was 7 years ago? 2019. Holy cow, COVID-19. Literally, that was the last full year that we lived prior to the pandemic and all of the experiences of the pandemic. There have been a couple of times very recently. In fact, one of them was while we were recording a podcast where I referenced things from the pandemic. and actually discovered later that I completely referenced the wrong year. So I think I referenced earning my applied positive psychology certification in 2020 and how that was sort of the constant in my life during that first many, many, many months of the pandemic was that I knew I would be in this virtual class every Tuesday and Thursday. And that was so solid and accurate in my mind that when I looked at my certificate and saw that it said 2021, I was shook. Like, I was like, what do you mean I did that in 2021? How is that possible? Because I was always at home sitting on my computer. How did I never have that Tuesday, Thursday class when I needed to be in Mount Pleasant on campus? And didn't I go to Mount Pleasant in campus in 2021? And didn't we have all these conversations in class about having big circles outside in the park where could be this many feet away from people, and how it was different for our people, our students in Canada than it was here in the US, and things about masking, and just all of it threw me for this time warp kind of loop where I thought, I cannot even sense what was 5 years ago or 6 years ago in an accurate way.
Right.
And then the second one was, as you know, Kevin had a tumor on his brain or on his pituitary gland. I guess that's in his brain, maybe. Is it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And again, I was 100% certain that that was in 2021, right? So a year later than my whole mindset around my positive psychology certificate, I was like, I know it's 2021 because I had to wear a mask in the hospital and I had to wear a mask in your room if any medical professionals were in the room. And you could only have two visitors at a time. But some people were surprised you could have any visitors at all because you were in the ICU, during recovery. And that was 2021. And his brother sent him a time hop memory. Remember when you were ice fishing with my sons and you were about to have this major event and you could hardly see and found out you had a tumor the next day? And the time hop said 2022. And he's like, that wasn't 2022. That was 20. I'm like, no, it was 21. You're right. So then I got on my phone and I searched through my photos. They were all in 2022. So anyway, just the whole 7-year slip conversation just really got me thinking about time and our perception of time and how we use time.
Yes. And I think that our perception of time, I remember being a kid and people saying, like, oh, time seems to go so much faster as you get older. I remember having conversations of how, like, when I was in school, it felt like the school year lasted so long. And of course, then as I got older and like I became a senior, like senior year became really, really, went by really fast. But now seeing it with my own children, my kids. So we've talked about how, like, this upcoming school year is a year that we have talked about kind of a lot in my family, and I'll explain it. So the way that my children are spaced out, with the exception of Ella and Mitchell, so kid 1 and 2, they had 1 year of overlapping school, and where they were both in the same building.
In the same building. Okay. I was like,
Yes.
what do you mean by overlapping schools?
Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
where they were in the same building. So during elementary school.
Okay.
And then I had kind of always said, I will always then have 3 children in 3 buildings
Hmm.
until Mitchell's last year of school, where he will be a senior and Carter will be a freshman.
Okay.
And so we are crossing into that in this upcoming school year. So right now, Mitchell's a junior, Carter's an 8th grader. Next year, I will have both kids at one school, like the last 2 that are in K-12. The oldest one is still in college, but I will have that kind of overlapping for 1 year. We've talked about them like riding together, all that type of stuff. But I've had this conversation for years and years and years, but it feels so weird to say, like, and we are now there. Like, we are in that because it has been one of those things that we have talked about. And then kind of all of the life things that happens with as your kids get older. And because children change in looks so much quicker there's just like that level of like, oh, you've gone from looking like a little kid to looking like a teenager to looking like a mini adult, you know. So Carter, the youngest, his birthday was yesterday. And so I had always kind of taken a picture of him on his birthday. So then all like in my time hop and things like that, I had a lot of pictures popping up from St. Patrick's Day being the day before and then his birthday being the day after St. Patrick's Day, kind of having that yearly comparison.
Mhm.
And they were super cute and I was showing it to him and he was like, "Oh, I loved when I was 4 and I made this thing," you know, and all of that. But as we kind of got to like these older years, like he even said he's like, I don't have that many more years to go until I'm like graduating high school and all that." I'm like, "No, you really don't." And so I think I see the years as they get older. I see the years go by even faster because there's still these very measurable parameters around it, meaning that like as I'm older, I mean, I have my work anniversary, right? But like my year to year experience
There's
when I'm
not a
not in
huge
school,
milestone,
right? It's
right?
not
Like
huge milestones. I mean, yes, I get another year older, that type of stuff. And yes, they go by fast, but like really, I measure the years based in like my kid's year in school, which September to June feels like it goes by really in a blink. You know, it's that whole saying of like the days are long, but the year's short. You know, I'm sure I'm butchering it, but that kind of thing where I just really do feel that as I'm kind of doing some of those comparisons, I guess,
Mhm.
or just kind of looking at the whole time continuum.
Well, as you talked about the milestones, right, that your children achieve, and this my upcoming milestone of both children being in the same school, it reminds me of planning for something big, right? Planning for a wedding or a big vacation and how far away something seems as you're anticipating it. And then you get there and it's like gone in a flash and then you're just savoring it, kind of later on. So it's really thinking about the 7-year slip, thinking about the lake house, thinking about our own lives and the pandemic and how that has sort of shifted our perception of at least the fewest, the most recent years. It makes me think a lot about the ways that we use time, the way that we balance all the things that we have going on in our lives. And that's where I think maybe it gets a little bit more serious, right? So when I was working on my positive psychology certificate, I remember our instructor saying over and over again, you can't manage time. And I had spent a lot of time trying to manage time, if that makes sense. And I didn't understand exactly what he meant for a while because I also was sort of really honing in on this idea of flow. And if you've ever studied or talked about flow, that's when you get so focused in on something, absorbed into this work that you're doing or this project that you're doing, you lose track of time and that you lose a sense of time. And I was like, that's where I want to spend more of my time is in flow, where it just like time disappears because I'm enjoying it so much and I'm so focused on it. So I'm like, here I am sort of pursuing this. What does flow mean? And how do I spend more time in flow? And then I have this instructor who also introduced flow to me, talking about you can't manage time. I'm like, what does that mean? His comeback was you can't manage time because time is constant. There will always be 24 hours in a day and 60 minutes in an hour. And those 60 seconds in every minute is always the same. You can't manage that. What you can manage is your use of time or your energy. You can manage your energy. That has kind of circled back to me a lot lately. And I think you just brought it back to the surface again when you started talking about the book, because there's a mindset shift that happens there. We've often talked about when we encounter people who blame others or blame circumstances for their behavior. or the way that their life is or why they didn't get something done, when you put that blame outward, you actually are giving up your control of it, right? Like if you own something that you've done, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, if you take ownership of that, that's when you have the ability to be more in control. And instead of giving it away, like I feel like you're giving it away when you blame outward. And the shift in language, even from time management to energy management, or time management to managing my use of time, I think brings the ownership back to me. And it's been a while since I thought about it. So, thanks for reading this book, so I can think
Sure.
about it again.
Well, and I think about too an assignment that so I used to teach community college and we would always do a unit in this kind of life skills class that I taught.
Mhm.
And in this life skills class, it was about budgeting. And I know I've mentioned this project that I would do with budgeting with money, but we had another budgeting project that we would do pertaining to time. And I would give the individuals in the course just a printout in half-hour increments of an entire week. And I would have them in class kind of mark off the way that they perceive that they spent their week. Block off in black, like the hours you slept at night, what time did you go to bed? What time do you get up? Go through what time do you have class? So those are spent learning. In between that, like when are you doing your homework? When might you be working? When all those things. And so what was really interesting about the assignment, and they would go through and they would do that. Then the following week, they had to keep a different piece of paper, same thing, a replicated one with them. And they had to every half hour kind of check in and mark out off. So it was in a little more real time. And then compare the two. And what was so interesting was the amount of hours in the day that they perceived that they were doing for something versus the real amount of time that they spent. Almost consistently, they all went to bed later than they actually thought they did. They all woke up later than they thought that they were going to wake up. They all thought that they spent more time in homework than they actually did. And what they really were spending time on was like video gaming, scrolling the internet, like playing on their phone. They didn't realize how much time that they spent kind of wasted in that way. And I would hesitate to say that like video games are a full-on wasting if they bring you joy, but the management of the time that you maybe spend doing that versus doing homework or doing something working towards something else was significantly less. There was an interesting amount of how much time they spent with other people because that was a question that kind of I asked like them to look at is throughout the day, how much time do they spend quality time with other people?
Mm,
And that was actually significantly less. They were always with people, but they were with people in class. And I said, okay, being with somebody in class doesn't count in the same way of being in class with somebody having a good conversation
right.
or, getting to class a little bit early and talking to the person next to you more than just talking about the weather. Have it, yes, you and your roommate might be in the same space, but are you actually engaging with one another or is your roommate doing the dishes and you're reading a book and there's really no communication happening? So
Mhm.
thinking about those and then also like the quality time you spend with family members. So if maybe you live at home and you have a significant other or you have children or you have your parents, like how much time in the week do you actually spend engaging in communication activities with the other people in your lives? And all of that was significantly less than what they thought. And so to our listeners, it really is kind of a cool experiment. So there's very easy to get like printables online, but if you have been thinking about your own kind of time and how you spend time, I do encourage you without any real calculation, write down all the things that you think you how you spend your week, what driving your kids to school, doing coursework, doing work, how many hours are you really doing that, eating lunch or visiting with a friend? And then keep your notebook, keep your journal, keep a printed piece of paper of time and actually look at how you are realistically doing it. How are you spending not only your time, but your time with quality, with people, and kind of do that comparison. And if you've noticed for yourself that there is any, maybe you feel a little lonely, maybe you feel hungry, maybe you are tired, maybe there's any kind of negative feelings, look at what is happening in that space and maybe what you could do a little different.
Coming into this conversation, I hadn't even thought about connecting the fact that quality time is sort of my lead love language.
Mhm.
And as you were talking, I had to quick write down quality time and circle it because you mentioned, I think briefly a little bit about, the time that you spend playing video games and or the time that you spend on social media or something like that. And I get so mad when Kevin busts me for being on my phone, like when we're sitting and having coffee in the morning or whatever, watching TV at night, even. And he's like, "Why are you on your phone? I thought we were watching this show together." Or, "Why are you on your phone?" And I get so mad, but I think I'm mad because I know that without even really paying attention to it, I was on my phone.
Mhm.
I was sucked into not using the time in the way that I wanted to use the time, and I got caught.
Yes,
So
yeah, that getting caught is definitely interesting. And so I too am love languages. I'm quality time as well. Time is something, especially time spent with other people, is very important to me. And I usually will recognize when I haven't spent enough time with someone too. I usually start having some feels about it. Like I
yeah,
feel a disconnect, or I feel it's like, I need to see if so and so wants to go to lunch, or, doing something like that. Like I will always kind of take a time activity of doing something together over just buying somebody something or doing something like that. But yes, with that, I know for myself, I too am one to in the evenings, and I can normally say, like, so was it a show that actually caught my like had my attention? And then, or was it something that Jeremy picked out that he's like, we should watch this? And then usually that's when I'm like, my phone is in my hand because I didn't really want to watch it. And he wants to talk about it. And so that's the key part. He wanted to talk about it as like a connection. And
hmm
when I wasn't really watching it, then the connection of like the communication about it after was kind of lost because I wasn't really watching it, but
yeah,
it wasn't something I really wanted to watch in the first place. And
yeah.
so it wasn't a quality time spent, even though the intention was for it to be.
Yeah, very much in the last probably 6 months or so, have really tried practicing building a habit of setting my phone upside down when I put it down so that I don't notice it light up if a push alert comes through or, just a little strategy I've been trying to add to my practices or add to my life so that it doesn't as easily distract me because I know that it's distracting me and pulling away from where I want my focus to be. I had this thought when you were talking about your assignment that you gave when you were teaching at the college. And it reminded me that I've sort of incorporated a different chart, but maybe the same sort of emphasis on thinking about your time assignment in one of the courses I teach. So, in my 500 level course that I teach, which has a very strong component on personal development and what kind of person do you want to be as a leader? I have what I call a weekly rhythm register, which is really hard to say fast. And
Sounds it, yes.
I know, right? So every week it's different because every week it has a row in the chart for the different tasks that you need to accomplish in the class. And because of the way I set up the class, it's not like, oh, there's 3 things you have to do in the week because every day they need to write down 3 things that they're grateful for. Once in the week, they need to listen to a podcast. Once in the week, they need to read an early childhood, statement of something. Every day they need to read 10 pages of a book. So there's lots of small tasks. And some students will look at me and say, "This is overwhelming. I've never had a class that has this many assignments." I'm like, "But they're not all these big assignments. They're small daily habits that I'm trying to help you to build. And I give you this chart because, the actual columns on the chart are the days of the week. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I just want you to check off for each of these, let's say 20 things, check which day of the week you did it. And so it's not like going down to the minutes per se, but more of an opportunity at the end of a week to see, did I space this out? Did I practice a daily habit? Or did I give up my entire Saturday or Sunday and do everything then, but also then not to get to be with my children because that's when they were home from school? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I that's interesting because for myself, I've recognized a habit within myself for coursework. And that when I first started this doctoral program, thought that I would spend a little bit of time every day doing something to do with my coursework. And that is frankly not the case. What it has happened, and it is very much turned into usually like a Friday because stuff is due Friday night. And then I had another due date point on Sundays that like I would spend hours on Friday and hours on Sunday doing my coursework. And now, as some of my classes have changed, I have like Sundays that I do coursework and usually something on Wednesday because I'm meeting with an instructor on Wednesday. I do kind of kick myself a little bit because that is typically the time that I'm not working and I could be spending some time with my family. And usually on Sunday evenings, I'm spending 4 or 5 hours, sometimes even 6 if it's a big thing, trying to get through coursework from like 3 to 9. And it can drive me absolutely insane at times. Like if I can just put in 3 hours, I'm like, oh my gosh, it means that like I'm free after 6 o'clock. But it's really difficult, right? Because it's that trade-off of like, how do you spend your week to like get to this one, like this one day? But I also have continually tried to do a little bit of work every day. I kind of think about what you mentioned about flow. I can't get into a flow state in an hour. And
Right.
so then it's very poignant. It's like so I feel like I'm constantly starting and stopping. So on Sunday, when I can get into a project and I'm really in the project and I'm doing it, I don't realize that 2 or 3 hours go by, or
Yeah.
4 hours, like because I'm kind of have it all dedicated to this project. And so I don't know, I kind of say that to speak it into the universe without really knowing or probably changing it.
Hmm.
I know I don't love spending that kind of time, but I do like that I can get so into the assignment and recognize I can get so into the assignment that I'm doing that I lose track of time.
Yeah. I think I'm starting with a book called The 7 Year Slip, sort of really feeling like I at least can walk away from this conversation thinking about the real value in maybe tracking our time. If our time, not time management, but our use of time and or our energy management, right? Like if there's something to be said about tracking the time that we're using and looking for ways to potentially block time or, block time better so that we can prioritize things that are important to us during the time periods where either A, we have the most energy, or B, this is the time period where I have an opportunity to be with my family. And so I'm going to block something earlier in the day, to get it done. So I think I'm going to walk away really thinking about this track and block kind of concept. And while you and I have both given it as assignments to others, I might want to tweak it a little bit and try it for myself for a little
Yeah,
while.
me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And what that might mean for prioritizing my use of time. And then the other thing, Amy, that I want to say is as I sort of think about the 7 year slip and what you said at the beginning about looking at ourselves 7 years ago, I just want to say to you that 7 years from now, you'll look back and say, oh, I was a doc student. Thank God that's over.
Yeah, I appreciate that because in the my everyday life right now, it feels like it will never finish, even though I also recognize in so many things that I've been talking about in the future, which is a year and a half away, and I'll be done.
Yay.
Or I'm committing to saying I'll be done, seems so big as well. But yes, to think in 7 years, it's not just like that'll have been like way past the time of being
Yeah.
done. So
Yeah.
I do think too that it's really interesting to think about the habits that you have now and how those kind of shift, and also who you are as a person today and the person that you might want to become. And that really in the grand scheme of things, time goes by pretty quickly, and you get to choose how you manage it. And I think putting some cognitive thought into who you want to be, how you want to use your time to best, or how you want to manage the use of your time to best help you versus hinder you. There are a lot of things to think about. And if you never have before, now feels like a great time to do that. Thanks for tuning in to This Was Supposed to Be Easy. Remember, the best stories are the ones we live.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep the conversation going, because life may not be easy, but listening in should be.
Stay curious, stay connected, and keep wondering.